Okay, we're live now. Hey, anybody that's watching this or watches this in the future, just kind of an impromptu discussion that really was put together last minute last night. We were hoping to get together, just um, wishing each other kind of Happy New Year, and realized that we had been talking about coming together and have a discussion, and we never got around to it last year. So we figured we'd kick the year off right, hopefully doing this. And Alex is someone I've spoken with for quite a while on Skype and a little bit on YouTube. I'm just going to kind of turn over to him and let him describe where he's at and what he believes. And from there, we're just going to let the conversation grow organically and just see what we can find out about each other. Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Alex. I've been sort of exploring kind of this field of extended consciousness for quite a while. So, whilst I don't really have a label that I can describe myself as, if you were to put certain labels on it, I would say it'd be more of like a Zen Buddhist or just a very kind of spiritual person. But it's it's almost like whilst I do appreciate that side of things, I'm also quite scientific. So I have been trying to find sort of different studies to back up some of this, like, well, I guess some of the notions that you might see in like Buddhism or any of this kind of New Age thinking. So yeah, that's where I'm at the moment. I'm just kind of exploring that particular field. I think there's definitely a lot of relevance to it when it comes to like what how we can change our society and where the future of the human race really is going and that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's really where I'm at.
That's really cool, man. I mean, I'm, usually, especially being in America, and I think you're England.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so from the people that I've spoken with from across the pond, so to speak, it doesn't seem to be nearly as in your face as it is in America. But here, because of the prevalence of Christianity, we tend to kind of focus on that. So, I'm really excited that I get to speak with somebody who's not that, and we can explore other avenues. To be quite honest, I'm putting together a panel. My daughter um, is she's old enough now. She's 15, and she's been coming to me lately with questions. And my fear is that she would, I guess, get indoctrinated by what I believe, and I don't think that's okay. I want her to form her own beliefs. I want her to figure out what if she has any supernatural, spiritual, whatever beliefs. That's fine. In fact, to be honest, I kind of hope she would. It would make for interesting discussions around the house. But so I put together a playlist for her to go and look at some of the more prevalent YouTubers and some of the people that I trust. She's actually wanting to get together with those guys, and hopefully, maybe this time next week, we'll actually all get together and kind of just kind of what it sounds like you're doing, explore what all of these different belief systems and all of these different things mean to those people in order to let her try and discern what makes most sense to her. So that's kind of, I don't know, interesting that we hit on this today uh, without even knowing it, because you know, full disclosure
Yeah.
here, I actually thought Alex was Christian before we went on the air. So, um, but I guess as far as when you're saying more of a spiritual and the Zen Buddhist type of belief system, just I think I'm fairly up to speed on that. But again, since we focus so much on Christianity, I guarantee I've forgotten more than I currently know. But
I mean, I suppose Zen Buddhism itself, it's more looking into yourself rather than on relying any sort of external information. And that is really how you so in Zen Buddhism, if you would want to seek out the truth, or you'd have to really think about it on your own, and you kind of become your own teacher, if that makes sense. Because the thing is, what I believe when it comes to different sort of religions is that no matter, you can say two people are Christian, but they'll never really look at things the same way. Like everyone has their own kind of way of looking at things, and English is a very it's not a very good language to describe things, especially when you're talking about things of a very esoteric nature. I mean, we've developed, better systems to describe certain aspects of nature, such as mathematics. And I think English, the issue with English is it's very open to interpretation. So that, that's one of the issues with having like a holy book that you would read, is because a lot of people can interpret that in different ways. So that's what really one of the core concepts of Zen Buddhism is. It's more to do with meditation, self-awareness.
Hmm. That's that's interesting. So at the end of the day, and again, I'm going off of my limited exposure. There would be nothing like a Christian would view, or most, well, I would say most religions out there, as an kind of a either a god or a series of gods. It's more that along more of a deistic viewpoint where you may even be part of God, and that
That's
everything.
that's exact. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's like we really focus on. Well, I say we. They would focus on sort of like a lot of times redefine, like really defining what you mean by God. Because it's a very important kind of definition in itself. Because when I say God, I certainly mean a very different thing to what a Christian might mean. So, to be part of God for me would just really mean being part of the energy that is the universe. Um, and energy, I mean mass as well. I mean time. I mean just kind of everything. And that's what one of the areas I've been exploring is how interconnected everything is, and if it is interconnected, what actually interconnects it. So that's sort of unified field theory, and there's a few other things that you might want to get into later down the line, but that's certainly what I've been looking into. So I'd say it's, yeah, a definition that what you define as God is would play quite an important role in your belief system.
Okay. Um, as far as I guess the uh, what us atheists, for lack of a better term, just so you kind of, I don't know if you're real familiar, but in case there's a viewer out there that doesn't know, I classify myself as an agnostic atheist, to where, um, although I will specifically say that I think it's highly unlikely, almost to the point of impossibility, some gods exist. Uh, I would say that some religions have kind of ruled themselves out through scripture and through other things. Most of the Judeo-Christian line, the Abrahamic religions, I think, are very difficult to defend, if not, like I said, almost impossible.
Yeah.
But then again, I'm still open-minded enough to say that I could be wrong there. So I'm not a hardline atheist where I'm going to make the claim that I know God does not exist. What I am going to, where I will put myself out there and where I will take on the burden of proof is that based on what I'm seeing, I don't think that there is a God, and I can, and that's where I do give defense and I guess evidence as I see it to support that conjecture. So I guess along that line, what would you provide for someone like myself who comes and again, view me as knowing nothing on this subject, and kind of give me what you think substantiates this type of belief system? Why do you believe this is the case and this is true?
Well, no, I would ask you first.
Oh, okay.
When you say God, what do you mean by what is God? So we would look at, sort of what really is it that, like, why do other people have this idea of a Godhead in their minds? And I guess it's not really anything to do with worshiping a god or trying to find the existence of a god. It's, because like I said, I'm quite limited with my language for describing these kinds of things. So really what I would provide you is the tools to look into yourself and say, okay, like really think about it. and you do that basically through meditation. And it's not really like anything super kind of out there, and it's just kind of like a feeling of being sort of interconnected or intertwined to this one reality in a sense. So, it's not, I wouldn't really try to convince you that there is this uh, kind of a super powerful being that exists in the sky and looks down on us and judges us. So that's not really what I would try to do. And in fact, I disagree with that such a notion even exists.
Right, and I think there we're along, at least we're kind of along the same lines. Is that um, to anthropomorphize God seems, in my opinion, that's one of the biggest problems I have with most of the, I guess, classical religions. Um, but I guess what I'm asking is that um, in your belief system, if God is, like I said, if God is the universe, we are all God. Um, what, other than self-reflection and your own meditation, is there anything external that would that someone else could look to, or is it
Yes, of course. So you're asking me, okay, let's say let's find a way to measure this God, right?
exactly
Maybe somehow quantify it. And really, the the only way we can do that is we can begin to look at um, the electric theory of the universe, or if we go back to the 20th century, around the time when Tesla and all these great scientists such as Steinmetz, they were beginning to develop this idea of a unified field. Of course, back then it wasn't called a unified field; it was called the etheric field,
right?
which then, if you're familiar with that entire story, you'd know, okay, it was disproven supposedly by the Michelson-Morley experiment, which was trying to basically have like a measurement for etheric drag, which it basically returned negative results.
Right.
But really, what we're looking at is to answer these questions about what it like, how interconnected the universe is, and that is what we define as God. Okay, that entire kind of scope of research. So you're talking about psychic phenomena. You're talking about anything that we just would be classed as supernatural. And I've done a fair bit of research into that. And you can go into specific areas of that. But there have been some good studies that I can provide you some links to.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
please. And for anybody watching this, any of the links that Alex provide me, I'll definitely put in the description below, so they can go and look for themselves as well. I'd love to use citation and make sure that we're backing up what we're saying. So yeah, that would be great. Anything you want to send me, I'm more than happy to look at. So one thing that I found that it seemed interesting that you were saying kind of these what would be classified, at least by some, as supernatural. And again, maybe I haven't run across the right studies. I haven't seen the right, I guess, field research or reviewed papers, but I haven't really seen anything to substantiate, um, for lack of a better term, any supernatural claim. So yeah, I mean, I'd love to kind of hear what you found, because I really do find that interesting.
well, I mean, what I found, I started from like the very simple things. Um, so the things that most people commonly know. So, for example, it's things like readings, like tarot cards, for example. And those are all just tricks. They're not really. There's nothing really going on there.
Great. Yep. That's I was hoping you would go there, because I was about to say, I don't know if that's
So,
okay.
like with tarot cards, that's just basically a part of this thing called the Forer effect. It's basically just a bunch of statements that can apply to anything.
Exactly.
So, I'm not really going down there. I'm looking for it's when things like, because the science is like the mainstream scientific community, that's a whole other issue. The important thing is to find good studies and good experiments which you can duplicate yourself.
Okay.
And it's very simple things. You'd be very surprised with these things. For example, there was this guy called Dr. Emoto, and he did this study where you essentially uh, try to affect the physical reality with your own emotions. Now, it is known that every single emotion actually releases an electromagnetic field. And that typically plays a role in like the unified field or the ether field, but that's a lot of research to go into at first. So I'll just brush over that like very quickly. But it's basically when you take boiled rice and you put it into 3 cups of water or 3 jars and you completely seal them, right?
Okay.
And on the first cup of water, you send good positive vibes to. The second jar you completely ignore, and the third jar you kind of send negative vibes to. And that was really one of the first experiments that was looking at how emotions can affect water. It's really trying to quantify what is going on. Now, I would really encourage anyone to do this. Just look up a little tutorial on how to do it, because a lot of people have actually done it on YouTube, and you can look it up, the rice experiment. A lot of people have gotten the same results.
Okay.
And what you find is that the positive jar, it actually, well, for his experiment, it actually started to ferment into pleasant kind of flavor and aroma, rather. The second jar actually eroded, and it deteriorated really badly. There was like all mold on it, really nasty stuff. And the third jar was like that as well, but not quite as bad. And basically, what his theory was that, like, out of everything, that you can affect the environment with positive and negative thoughts, but also completely ignoring something and being indifferent to something is also considered a fairly negative thing. But that's kind of makes things a bit more complicated. So to simplify the entire thing, you can just do a positive and a negative jar, which is essentially you sending bad vibes to one jar, sending good vibes to the other. And what that just raised a lot of questions, because it's things that we do that we don't really have a way to like define what is going on there, like, because we don't have the scientific model itself can't just wrap itself around that. So that's one of the experiments. There are a few more experiments with sort of using like this concept of astral projection and that kind of thing as well. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with anything. I'm just kind of throwing like different examples out there, but really it's where the citations come in. It's really where it's like, okay, now we need to read through the actual study itself and see what's going on there.
Right. And I'm not very familiar. I had run across the rice experiment before. There was also another one that seemed to run somewhat parallel to that, with plants, to where if you treated plants negatively, they wouldn't grow as well, that type of thing.
Yeah.
There, and again, I'm reaching way back for this, 5-6 years now. I'm trying to trying to remember what I had remembered. I know that I had, when I found those, I looked for some explanations, and I found some that I thought were fairly conclusive, at least to me. But to be honest, I am not up to date in that in any way. As far as the astral projection thing, I'm familiar, I guess, to the point of knowing what some of the CIA and FBI programs were back in the, I guess it was early 50s and 60s,
Yeah.
using, trying to use, I think it was Star. God, what was the name of it? Anyway, it doesn't matter. But so, but again, from what I remember reading, it really didn't go anywhere. Now, again, I'm not up to speed on this, so.
Well, I mean, the reason for that was during that time they moved on to satellite imagery. That was in not exactly in the 1950s, but they had like new projects going on for basically satellite imagery, and they figured that humans were not as cost effective, and also because not many people could do it. There was only one famous case of this guy just finding out about this, classified military base, which shouldn't have actually shown up in any of the maps or nothing like that. So yeah, he got questioned for being a spy. But that it's like you can never really know what's going on inside those kind of organizations because everything's
Right.
kind of locked down.
Yeah,
But
and I will, I'll be more than willing to admit that it could be that they're still doing it. It's just classified, and they don't want anybody to know. But um, it's I'm I'm fair. I don't know if you might know my background. My undergraduate was in physics, and everything past then has been aerospace, and I'm a pilot, that type of thing. So as far as I guess the projected costs, I don't know if I would agree with that. I mean, I know that you know, understanding at least in I guess I'm fairly well up to speed on some of the costs on putting anything into orbit and trying to maintain that system. It's expensive to put, especially what we would consider to be a spy satellite or any kind of imaging satellite into orbit would be. I mean, you could pay someone quite a bit for a long time if they were, as effective or even remotely as effective. It would seem that um, given the ability to camouflage things on the ground, especially back in those days, because your resolution at that point were at best tens, maybe even hundreds of meters. Nowadays we're down to, even at the unclassified level, we're down to at the best a meter to a half a meter as far as resolution goes. Um, so I don't know if I would necessarily believe that it was a cost issue.
when I say cost, I think the issue was for them when I was reading about it. What they meant by cost was sort of more because the thing is, supposedly not everyone could be as accurate with it, and suppose like satellite imagery was really what they wanted to go for because, well, the thing is, it's human perception. So even if they did get some good hits on certain things, they might have got a misinterpretation in one of these supposed trips, and that would have been sort of devastating, like from an intelligence
Okay.
perspective.
All right, and that, I mean, that makes sense. That, I mean, all of us. I mean, I know when I'm flying, I look at the ground and look at things, and sometimes see patterns that when I go back the other direction aren't there. It's just like that. Almost, maybe not to the point of crop circles, but definitely things that are like that. Just looks a little too straight. That looks a little too, whereas it really isn't there. It was just an optical illusion based on where the sun was. The sun may have been setting and casting shadows, and there's all kinds of things that'll cause that type of thing. Okay. So, I mean, I guess what would you invite people to do to kind of become aware of this? I mean, of course, I want to see your links, and please provide us all with that, and I'll definitely link all that. But is there anything before kind of diving into the deep end and going and trying to dig through all the research and vet which research is?
Well, the thing is, you're asking very hot topics here. You're asking essentially whether how psychic really are human beings. You're asking about astral projection. There's a lot of the thing with today, like with the advent of the internet, there's a lot of different communities that basically preach this kind of information. There's especially a lot of new age communities, and they don't necessarily do it in a way where it's very constructive. There's like, I'm not going to name any particular community, but there's a lot of communities that don't really give very insightful evidence to back up any of their claims, and it's sort of more mumbo jumbo, kind of like their own interpretation of it. So before I'd invite anyone to research this stuff, I'd really want to ask them why they want to do like research any of it. I really want to ask them what they want to know, and I'd want to encourage them to do their own research and not really just go like take any shortcuts for it. So even with the links I post, I'd invite people to basically debate with those links, see what their own interpretation of it is, and hopefully we'll reach a stage where a lot of people can actually come to the same sort of conclusions, and it'll definitely give more of an incentive for modern science to start focusing on these particular areas. But yeah, that's what I would do. I would just kind of say, okay, don't necessarily focus on just watching like one movie and
Right.
thinking, hey, I know everything now. Definitely just keep going with it. It's an iterative process.
Yeah, and I mean, I really I like that approach. I like that you're willing to not only say, look, I think this is real, but don't trust me. Uh, Go out
Yeah.
there and make sure it's real. And that I most well, again, I'm really I'm biased because of how much I have to deal with Christianity and Islam and Judaism and things in the U.S. Um, they take the complete opposite approach in that you have to have faith and believe first, and then you'll see then God will reveal Himself or whatever. But I really like that you're willing to say, look, this is what I found appealing. This is what I've found compelling. Go look at it. Let me know what you think. And that that to me is wonderful. That's exactly where I think we ought to be. In that, at least in my opinion, the best way that we as a species have developed to understand and know what is true versus not true. Of course, skipping the fact of solipsism and that little rabbit hole, um, is the scientific method. And as long as we can, like you said, as much as possible, not only use what we consider to be valid sources, but also, when able, conduct the experiments ourselves. Like you said, do the rice experiment, do the plants experiment. Um, you know, Go and look at this stuff and see if you get the same results. Um, and then go out and not only look and see why you may have gotten those results based on you know your approach, but what what the people that run contrary to say. Why would the rice be oh, what we would consider to be bad or not look as healthy when we gave it negative vibes, so to speak, and why the other rice would have been white? And is it repeatable? Can we do it if we do it 10 times in a row? Do we get the same thing, or is it six times it works, seven or four times it doesn't? And
Well, I mean, that specific case with the rice experiment, I did actually read the peer review on it.
Cool.
And the thing is, they did do this experiment and they got very sort of, I would say, not convincing results.
You know,
And
I'm kind of as you probably could tell, I'm kind of a math guy and like stats. Do you know what the sample size was and what the?
I can't remember off the
Okay.
top of my head, I gotta tell you, but I think they definitely did it. They didn't just do one iteration of it. They definitely did like, three different samples, and they were the thing is what they were trying to do is they weren't actually doing the rice experiment itself, but it was very related to the rice experiment.
Okay.
What they were doing is I think they were playing different types of music to in the presence of water, so like nearby water, and they were flash freezing the actual water and zooming in and looking what crystals were starting to be formed. And they found like from what I remember, a very slight correlation, very slight. It wasn't anything too substantial, but in the peer review, like it kind of went on to say that this is definitely an interesting area of research and it should definitely be taken further. The reason is like the basis of this entire thing is that our minds can actually manipulate to some extent, or our emotions can manipulate to some extent the external environment. And if that is true, then essentially every person that was doing that experiment is essentially contaminating the results. They're creating these different biases in the results. So that's essentially what the conclusion of that peer review was.
Well, but I guess the thing that kind of struck me there is you were saying it was more of a they were, for lack of a better term, bombarding the water with sound, which,
Yeah.
well, I would think that if you're setting up an environment with sound waves are going to propagate not only through the air but also through the water. In fact, they propagate better through water. So I would assume, on my limited knowledge of hydrodynamics, that there should be a if we set up the same oscillation and then we could flash freeze water fast enough to capture the state of those atoms. Now, it would be almost like a snowflake, I would think that
Yes,
there's
yes.
that.
But the only caveat with that was it's only when you play a certain type of music would it be would it resemble the shape of a snowflake.
Well, not. I'm just saying that we should get based on whatever music. If we're doing, classical music, let's say, um, the same symphony, or even just constrain it to one note. If we just played a B flat and then flash froze it, um, I would assume that based on the vibrations propagating through that medium through water, that if we could flash freeze it fast enough, we would expect to see a pattern that would correlate with a B flat. And then if we went to a C sharp, let's say, that because of the different wave, both in pitch and amplitude, we would assume that yeah, it might change the water as well. But I wouldn't. That would be, I guess, I could I could correlate that more to a naturalistic driver. In fact, I would attribute that purely to a naturalistic driver, namely the sound waves and their pitch and amplitude. Whereas what it seems like you're saying is that not only do um, our emotions affect the water, but we can pollute that sample with multiple, if there's multiple sentient life forms around with different states of emotion, it's going to pollute that, and that's why you're not going to get a clear, I guess, a sample of the water or a clear pattern that would be repeatable. Is that
Yeah, and that was sort of the conclusion of the peer review for it. So yeah, we just have to find a more kind of objective way to measure that. I think one of the most objective ways we did measure it was with what you were saying about plants. The entire story behind that was sort of this. There was this guy, and I'm not going to go into details now, but he was basically he was an ex-detective, and he back in those days when you had lie detector tests, you'd actually put it on your like around your wrist, and it would basically monitor a change in conductivity on the surface of the skin because assumingly when you're lying you sweat a little bit more. And that basically, you have like a chart, and it's like you got this needle on it, and it starts to ramp up when like the conductivity changes. So what he did was he actually measured that with plants. So he put on he strapped this plant to this entire setup, and I don't know exactly what plant it is, but I'm sure I'll mention it. But it was a type of plant. And he had in the room, he actually exposed it to, it wasn't exposing the plant to negative stimuli. What he actually had was like this hot water bath, and he had like a few different life forms. Like he had some crabs, and he dipped the entire crabs into the hot water bath, so they'd start boiling. And what he saw was that the meters started to spike up, and the plant got a very, like a very significant reaction from that. So initially he thought, okay, maybe it was like the excess steam coming out of the water, or something in the room, some kind of physical stimuli, right? So maybe like, I don't know, however they might want to, like a change in heat or anything, really a change in pressure even. So to eliminate any of that, he actually took it to a different room entirely. So it was completely blocked off from all physical sort of stimuli. And he repeated the experiment, and what he found was that actually the plant reacted just in the same way. And that was really, like a very surprising result. And to this day, no one could really explain it. But I'm pretty sure you could repeat the same kind of experiment fairly easily. So yeah, that was another thing.
yeah? What's interesting is um, when I was reading that again, I may be conflating completely different stories, but I thought that there was a time that someone had even come out and said that plants, they've now been able to determine that plants themselves are exhibiting at least rudimentary type emotions, um, which kind of has a moral implication as far as vegetarian and all that. Um, but I'm wondering. I mean, again, I please, if you still have those links and all that, send them to me. I'd love to have a chance to look over them for a week or two and kind of dig through them, and then maybe we can come back together and kind of discuss what I've found and anything else that you've had a chance to put together that you think that you find compelling. Because, man, most of my viewers know. Um, the main reason, like I think you alluded earlier, that you would ask the person why do they want to know, or why would they be interested in knowing where you're coming from. For me, I'll be honest, it's purely selfish. I want to know what's true. I want to believe true things. It's that simple. And if this is real, if what you're saying is true, I want to know it. So, and and it doesn't hurt me if I have the time to sit around and, read a paper or, anything else, watch a video or whatever you found compelling, and then kind of, like you said, go in and try to vet that from my own perspective and see if I find it compelling as well, because I might, and that would be cool. So
Well, yeah, I mean that's the I kind of that's just a very specific thing, that particular experiment. So I'm trying to get it down to that detail. But what all these experiments are basically starting to form is kind of like just a picture of every being kind of interconnected through this kind of field, if you can imagine it that way, or through something
right.
that it's almost like a different type of a different form of communication. um I'm
To
not
me,
sure where I'm going with it in terms of
well,
just
I think that, and since the just came out, and it may sound like I'm being a little facetious or belittling here. I'm not. I mean this sincerely. It kind of sounds like you're talking about, and I'm not saying specifically, but something like is described in Star Wars in the Force, that there's something that is permeating everything in the universe, and therefore we are all connected through that medium. So, and
that's kind of what I'm describing. I mean,
okay,
really, it is like the force or the ether field or the unified field, or we have a lot of different labels for this kind of thing, but that's really what I'm trying to argue here. I'm trying to argue that there is a unified field that interconnects all living things, and that's a different topic of what is living, what isn't living, because even our perception of what is living is changing. As you mentioned with plants, like there's a kind of debate of whether they do exhibit emotions, but essentially we don't really understand what consciousness is, so it's difficult to pinpoint what is living. So I'll just say that, okay, it's just interconnected with the entire universe, and somehow we are interconnected with it. But it's to what extent we can tap into that, and that's really the topic of conversation that I'm going down here.
do you feel that it's let's say there's a spatial component to this, and that I guess the best analogy I would draw is like gravity. Um, Gravity, as far as we can tell, is universal. I mean, anything that has mass pulls on. It's not really pull, but lack of a better term, pulls on everything else. Um, but it distance dramatically affects how much we feel that. It's the inverse square law. But
I think that actually definitely applies, because especially like with the research I was reading, from I think almost the same guy who did the plant experiment. He mentioned that when sort of that you have these kind of areas where essentially there's either pollution or something like bad or some negative stimuli, plants effectively start to grow and they start to wilt. That sounded like, I don't think he measured it, but this does sound like the inverse square law kind of does apply to it. If we do feel these like vibes or anything like that, like when people talk about energy, it's almost like when you walk into a room and there's nothing really there to tell you that everyone's having a bit of a rough time, but you just feel like this kind of like drain or this kind of low energy, And that's what really like this is like, you know, this is only speculation at this point, but this is what many people experience, and they're saying, you know, this is related to these kinds of experiments where it's like you're tapping into that field. So yeah, I think that in terms of the inverse square law, I think that definitely applies with this field. And it's like why sort of plants don't feel, in these experiments anyway, they don't feel stimuli from things that are 1,000 miles away, for example. So
Right. Do you think that because it would seem, and maybe this is one of the reasons that it didn't work as well as it was, that in those older experiments when they were really trying to, what we were talking about earlier, the CIA and NSA, or I don't even know if it was NSA. I know it was CIA though. That since they were trying to do these astral projection and remote viewings from, you know, thousands of miles, that would account for the, I guess, hit and miss, or the errors that are there. Or do you think
I
that?
think it's very, because the thing is, what I'm talking about is sort of our like our physical space. So I think in the physical space, so in the three-dimensional space, I think that definitely the inverse square law does apply. But the thing is, we don't really understand much about the astral plane or any of these kind of very, I'd say, not new ideas, but definitely sort of ones that there hasn't been a lot of scientific sort of exploration in those fields. And, you know, there isn't a kind of model to explain it as of yet. I mean, right now, I'm struggling between sort of just linking the ether field from what was the early 20th century to the unified field theory, which is what I'm going to go into research later on in my life because I'm still studying at this point. But, you know, that's the astral bit is just, you know, we don't really have much on it. The only thing we do have on it is some experiments that you'll be able to find, which I'll try to find some links for. But in
Okay.
terms of having, like, what we don't have for any of this is a very kind of unified model that people like. We don't have a platform for people to like debate about this model, and it's not very well known, kind of very, you know, it's not. Yeah, that's one of the issues. And I think definitely there's a lot of things. So, you know, there's a lot of experiments that have happened that basically um kind of they ask a lot of questions, and there's a lot of questions that we haven't really tried to answer or explore yet, and that's one of the issues. So yeah, there's not really, you know, like I said, it's not as simple as, you know, like mechanics or anything like that. So yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I like I said, I'm more than open. I definitely would be willing to look at anything you've got. I hope my viewers will do the same. And anybody that happens to see this, please, comment. Let us know what you know, and I'll be willing to look at your stuff too. Either, um, I hate using this word, but attempting to debunk this or support it. I want to know both sides. So, um, the I guess I'm trying to remember. And again, the problem with I'm almost positive it was called Stargate from the CIA, but again, I could be wrong on that.
I think it
But
was called okay, actually.
okay, I got lucky. But I thought that program ran for decades. I thought it was 20 or 30 years long. Now again, how much of the actual data are we going to get access to? If they did find something, that's a whole nother can of worms. But I, I think you're right. I think that it would be interesting to kind of go through and see who has, from at least an experimental standpoint, attempted to demonstrate that there is something out there. Um, because other than gravity, I think that, and who knows, it might be, gravity may be the medium or the carrier wave, or whatever it is that this field that you're talking about, could exist through. In the way water works with whales all the way across oceans where they communicate. Um, but I just I'm definitely in over my head because I
Well, I
haven't
mean,
looked at this in a long, long
the
time.
thing these are, I'm only really describing some interesting experiments at this point. I mean, the only real kind of, mathematical rigor or anything like that, all that really corresponds to what happened in the early 20th century, which was done basically by a few individuals. There was Oliver Heaviside. I don't know if you've heard of these, Steinmetz, and of course Tesla.
Right.
And they were talking about the exact same kind of thing. They were talking about a non-material field, um, in which you can use to kind of permeate these thoughts, or this kind of energy, as you would describe it. So, yeah, that was sort of one of the things I was looking into. And I actually have an entire library on that, surprisingly. Uh, so yeah, I can definitely give you an FTP link for it, and you
Yeah,
can check
please
it
do.
out.
That'd be great. And just so you know, Tesla was absolutely one of my favorite scientists of all time. He's a very interesting guy. Um, I lived in Colorado Springs for quite a while, and I am sure you're aware of the
Mhm.
experiments he did around there.
Yeah,
And I'm still, I mean, I got to tell you, the finding out the free energy device that he was trying to play with and how that was scrapped, literally, it's that.
that's really my kind of field. I mean, the experiments that I've just described to you, like the rice experiment or anything to do with like different plants, that's only looking at sort of a similarity between what Tesla was thinking at that time and what he could sort of make work, if that makes sense. And that only comes from the same kind of thing, because it's like we're talking about the same field that essentially communicates anything, because that's what he was working on. He was working on utilizing this thing that he called the ether field for that.
Right.
Now, there's actually a whole story behind that. And I don't, have you heard of a person named Eric Dollard?
No, I don't think I have.
So Eric Dollard was he's basically he was a modern day Tesla, and he managed to replicate some of his experiments.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he went absolutely insane. Um, Main, he was absolutely insane. Yeah, because there was a lot of people that would try and take advantage of him, and yeah, he's not a very at least that's what I've heard so far. But yeah, he has a very good like lecture on sort of how electricity came to be and what was electrical engineering back then. So yeah, I do have a lot of information. I think that's a really, I think for in terms of the future of the human race, I think we should definitely go back to that and like definitely look a lot closer at what was going on. Um,
Why would you? Hopefully, we're not getting into conspiracy theory land, but I mean, again, it may be. Why would you? Why do you think that we've moved away from that? Why do you think that there's been such a shift?
well, I mean, the thing is, conspiracy theories, in my opinion, are not all kind of far-fetched, crazy ideas. I mean,
Oh, not all of them by any means. You're right.
I think the thing that happened with Tesla was obviously he got shut down by the JP Morgan
Yeah.
because he wanted to create like an oil industry essentially.
Yep.
He didn't want people to have this access to free energy. No,
Exactly.
I mean, like in terms of the financial side of things, in terms of like the societal factors, I don't think we live in a very good society. And I'm actually a supporter of this thing called the Venus Project, which describes a society sort of almost without money, without war, and that kind of thing, which basically it all stems down to vested interests. I suppose if you have a massive conglomerate and there is some new technology, they will try to get rid of it. They'll try to get it off the market. Because
Yeah, and well, I know that from aircraft industry, if nothing else. There's there just now composites are finally coming on board and being looked at as a legitimate replacement for aluminum, which in my opinion that should have happened at least 10 if not 20 or 30 years ago.
uh,
But so I agree that you're going to have the people out there who are going to have the power and have the means to buy up, for lack of a better term, all of the ideas that would adversely affect their business. And that happens. There's no way around it. People may call me conspiracy theory on that. I can just from my experience alone, I know that happens. But I guess the other end of the spectrum is that again, I try to safeguard my identity at least a little bit, and especially my wife, but not to put too fine of a point on it, but um, well, I'll put it out there. She's a research scientist. She works at a national laboratory, and I'm I guess I've been to the high physics laboratory quite a few times, and it would seem that the people there anyway um, don't really have much constraints. If they find something interesting, the lab, for the most part, will allow them to kind of follow that field. Most colleges are the same way. If you
Mhm.
can, especially if you're if you're running a doctoral program and you get a candidate that has an interesting, no matter how far fetched, if they want to spend 5 to 7 years running down this rabbit hole, they're going to let you. I mean, most, especially most for-profit universities, because they're getting paid the entire time you're doing. And I mean, most advisors, at least at that level, aren't going to let you go on some completely far-fetched, um, meaningless endeavor. But there's enough diversity throughout the scientific community that I think you'd be hard pressed um, to not be able to find a place to at least allow you to start and um, do the basic research just to see if there is anything behind it. So one thing that you said earlier, that you're I guess you're still at university, or you're
Yeah, yeah.
okay. Um, if you are going to go for postgraduate type stuff, I would, if nothing else, see if you can get some funding. See if you can get someone to sponsor you for your doctorate if you're going that high. Um, put in your I don't know what your field is. It sounds like you're electrical engineering, somewhere along that type of thing.
Yeah, it's maths, electrical engineering, computer science, that kind of.
Okay. So I mean, I I think it would be interesting to see someone try to say, look, I found some stuff that I think is compelling that Tesla did, and I'd like to follow along those lines and see if I can expand on what we know he discovered, and see if there's anything that was lost, between now and when he was there. Because I mean, we know the history. He had that his one lab completely burned to the ground, losing everything that was in there.
Um,
So
yeah, that's sort of, yeah, that's definitely interesting. But there's reasons why normal people can't really do that. For starters, to do with information. You know, there is this group of people called the Borderland Sciences Institute, and they were actually compiling a lot of sort of information about these different types of fields, especially ones related with Tesla's research. And they compiled like the entire archives that the FBI had on Tesla, and I'll actually send those through as well to you.
yeah,
And if you
please.
look, they were mentioning a lot of sort of out there stuff, especially when it came to things concerning his death ray concept. And
Right.
you just really have to see this stuff on an official FBI document to just even believe it. But there's a lot of good stuff in there, and I think that these sort of topics are quite controversial because, well, I mean, for a start, with the free energy concept, you're talking about routing power through the ground. It's nothing to do with breaking the laws of thermodynamics. It's not about creating new energy. It's just about harnessing a different source of energy, just like solar power. And the thing is that there have been, at least to my best knowledge, individuals that did replicate these sort of designs before. But the real issue is it's not actually just building something and doing research on it, because there's already enough research on it, I suppose, to get like a basic thing running. It's actually to popularize it and to actually say, okay, we have this thing that basically creates free energy. Even if that was true, what would happen to the entire planet? You'd have to have an entire shift in power, which would, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is chaos, absolute chaos, So,
Well, but I think like anything else, I mean, when we shifted from literally burning wood and maybe coal to going dependent on oil and natural gas, there had to be a transition there into that basis. Even, I mean, well, electricity. When most of our electricity still is fossil fuel driven, but the electricity itself was not even available until we built the infrastructure and got everything through it. I think the main difference now between those days and now is that we have, I would, I still believe that the internet is free, is that for the most part, in most parts of the world, the information, if it's there, can be disseminated. We can get it and we can distribute it to just about everybody. So if there are people out there that have this type of thing and know this type of thing, um, and can not only provide, I guess, reasons why it works, but let's say prototypes that people could start building themselves. People like, I would say you. One of my relatives is an electrical engineer. I've got a bunch of engineers in the family. I don't know if I'd have the skill set to do it, but possibly even myself if I tinkered around with it enough. But if we could get that, if this does work, if there is something behind this, get it to go viral, get it to the masses, and say, you know what, look, if you don't want to be dependent on Con Ed or whoever else provides your electricity, build this thing in your backyard, and you're off the grid. You're good to go. Kind of like solar cells, if they were better than 20 or 30% efficient. And even then, there's people that are off the grid because of doing their entire roof or half their roof in solar power. So I think that there's the opportunity out there now. 100 years ago, I would be right with you. I'd say there's no way because the corporations and everything else had such an ability to quell any kind of growth. Those days are quickly, at least in my opinion, becoming like the dinosaur. So,
I suppose. I mean, yeah, there is something. I know some group of people are working. I'm working on it with them, which is, I mean, the thing is, the FTP link that I'll send to you. The information on it you'll never actually be able to find in one place, because there was a group of people who had this information at some point and they essentially lost it. They made it unavailable to the public for whatever reasons. It just seemed absolutely insane to me. So yeah, I'm looking to redistribute whatever knowledge I sent to you. So I'll send out an FTP link. I'll put it up on my Google Drive or a Dropbox, so you'll be able to link that through to everyone else.
okay, great. I'll definitely do that.
But yeah, there's definitely a lot of stuff on there, and it's not just sort of. There's definitely a lot of technical drawings, schematics that people can try out themselves. Definitely.
Nice. That sounds good. I've found that most of the time, if we try to keep these to about an hour, even if we don't have a lot of viewers watching at the time, it tends to get a lot more views later on. And I'll post it to my link. I'll say this now, and I'll probably post an annotation in the beginning. Anybody that wants to use this and mirror it, feel free. Alex, if you've got other means you want to put this on, feel free. I look at it as public domain. I'm not gonna DMCA anybody for using this stuff. So feel free to mirror it, do whatever. I mean, I think it's an interesting conversation, and I definitely would like to look into all the stuff you've got. So send it to me, and maybe give us a few weeks or so, and we can look over it, and maybe come back together and kind of start picking things apart. And hopefully you're right, because I'd love to see a reemergence of Tesla type stuff. Like I said, he's always one of my favorite people, and the very interesting man, regardless if any of his stuff is real or not. His life story, if you don't know it, you need to go know it. He was a really interesting guy.
Yeah, he was quite interesting, definitely. But yeah, I'll send you through the stuff. I'll keep a focus on really just the Tesla stuff, all the Steinmetz stuff, because really we need to go and look at that first. We need to go look at what he was doing, whether his things actually did work and whether, it wasn't just sort of just, like kind of lies that he created or anything like that. We need to really go test it out. And then I think only then can we start talking about, rice experiments or like trying to link that to human psyche or anything like that. So yeah.
Well, the only thing I would caution you there is I hate things that, well, being a pilot, I hate single point failure. I always want to have an out, so to speak. So um, Tesla may have been wrong, and it may not have been. And what I'm saying is that even though Tesla may have been wrong, the overall concept still may be right, in that there is this, for lack of a better term, unified field that everything can communicate through and everything else. So although I think I do like where you're going, I do like starting with Tesla because, like I said, we do know that he was very good at what he did. I still think that if you fail there, if Tesla ends up being a dead end, um, I don't know if I would so much just kind of throw in the towel there because I would think there still would be other possibilities out there. Um, and in my opinion, knowing what's wrong is just as important, if not more, than believing that you know what's right. So.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Yeah, I think for the most part, I do actually believe that Tesla did know what sort of he was on about, and he did have some good inventions. But that's just based off things that I've seen, certainly. So
Well, a lot of his stuff really worked and really worked well. So, I do think that there's probably a lot of things that were lost, and maybe some things that, like you said, between Edison and between well, everybody else at the time there that was against him were either bought up or destroyed in fires or anything else. And I mean, if nothing else, if we find one piece of equipment that is useful, then that's a win. That's interesting and it's cool. So, but anyway, why don't we kind of? I'll let you have closing on this, and we'll plan on coming revisiting this sometime in the future, especially if anybody out there watching or that does watch this has some comments, and maybe next time we can open it up to questions from some viewers and stuff.
I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, I just want to sort of like the way I'd want to probably do it is perhaps like the next, I don't know, maybe a couple of weeks, just get a collection of questions from the users.
Okay.
We can just go about sort of looking at those and perhaps answering their questions or any kind of criticisms that they may have as best as I can. And perhaps maybe you can, if you want to have your own perspective on that. And yeah, we can maybe just debate. Well, not debate necessarily, but just share some ideas and
Yeah, just kind of like what we did tonight, just kind of talk and bounce things off each other. That's fine. And like I said, I'll get up to speed as much as I can. Next week's going to be really tough, especially if this discussion with my daughter goes off. But the week after that.
Oh, I think we should just definitely leave it for like maybe a month or something, because I'm really busy anyway.
Oh, great. Well, that works. That actually works a lot better for me because I've got.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff there. There's like videos and
Yeah,
files. So
I was going to say is scientifically savvy as I sometimes think I am. As soon as I open a peer-reviewed paper, I'm like, well, I don't know anything anymore. So I could see this being taking quite a bit of research to even get a grasp on, let alone develop any real opinion about. So
yeah. So
all right. Well, thanks, man. This was really interesting, and I had a good time. Thanks for the contact. We'll do it again.
All right.
All right. Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll do this again sometime.
All right.